For Calgary Forest Lawn.
After 8 years of the Liberal-NDP government, they plan on quadrupling their carbon tax scam to crush families, farmers, and First Nations further. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. He refuses to tell his senators to stand down and pass common-sense Conservative Bill C-234 to take the tax off our farmers. Even First Nation communities, more than 100, are fed up and taking this government to court over the carbon tax, saying it's disproportionate and an unfair burden to them. When will the Prime Minister take the carbon tax off families, farmers, First Nations, finally?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And for the fourth or fifth time, I'd like to remind the Conservatives that the only senators that sit in a caucus sit in their Conservative caucus, and the Senate is in fact independent, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, I would actually like to raise the fact that the Conservatives have had this really troubling trend of bullying, particularly female senators, whenever they're not getting what they want out of the Senate. And that's a real problem, Mr. Speaker. That's a problem for democracy, and they should reconsider how they manage their affairs on Twitter and accusing senators of not advancing their legislation at their whimsy.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
This is coming from the guy that swore at a girl in her DMs. After 8 years, the Liberal-NDP government's empty acts of reconciliation are not worth the cost. A recent Auditor General report proved the carbon tax is an unfair burden on Indigenous communities, something that the Chiefs of Ontario reiterated just last week. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? So is this Liberal-NDP government, because they still plan on quadrupling this carbon tax scam. When will the Prime Minister take the carbon tax off families, farmers, First Nations, finally?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, a price on pollution is an important part of addressing the climate issue in a manner that actually promotes innovation and incentives. But let me read you a couple of things here. I quote, "We recognize that the most efficient way to reduce our emissions is to use pricing mechanisms." I quote, "We will work with the provinces and territories at both the national and state level to develop a trade system for greenhouse gases." Those are the Conservative Party platform from 2008 and 2021. My God, is the height of hypocrisy in this chamber.
Honourable Member for Foothills.
A common-sense Conservative Bill 234 will save farmers close to $1 billion. But this Prime Minister, who is demanding his senators block this bill, is not worth the cost. The Keelstra farm in Okotoks paid $180,000 in carbon taxes this year. When the Prime Minister quadruples that tax, it'll be $480,000 just in carbon taxes. There is no way, when 2 million Canadians are relying on food banks, that we cannot afford to have affordable, nutritious, Canadian-grown food. Will the Prime Minister finally remove the carbon tax from families, farmers, and First Nations?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, being a farmer, I fully understand how important it is to take care of the soil and to take care of the environment. Our party has a plan for the environment. My honourable colleague's party does not have a plan for the environment. Quite simply, we're able to make, with our plan, millions of dollars in British Columbia to help farmers innovate, increase their production, and make sure farmers remain on the cutting edge. We have and will continue to do that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
I agree with the Agriculture Minister. Our plan is definitely not to bankrupt farmers and continue to make food unaffordable. Canadian farmers are struggling under punishing input costs like the carbon tax. In fact, often the carbon tax costs them more than the natural gas they use. But the Bill C-234, a common-sense Conservative bill, is the solution. But the Prime Minister is blocking his senators from passing this bill in the Senate. Will the Prime Minister follow his 2001 campaign and pass it forward and let this bill pass the Senate and finally take the carbon tax off farmers, families, and First Nations?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate my colleague's concern, but I think he's fully aware the only party in this House that has any control over senators is the Conservative Party of Canada. We do not have senators in our party. And there was some talk of harassment in the Senate. We're not involved in harassment. What we want to do as a government is make sure we make farmers innovate, produce more product, and be more profitable. We have and will continue to do that, Mr. Speaker.
Just want to say, the Honourable Member is right here next to me. I can't hear him at all. The Honourable Member, l'Honorable Député de Mégantic-L'Érable.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, People are desperate about their future. There was a survey in the Journal de Montréal, Quebecers 18 to 45 years old. Well, 75% of them are putting off major life events like having children or buying a house. The Liberals and Bloc voted against the motion, which would lower the cost of everything. So will the Prime Minister support C-234 because it would lower the cost of groceries for all Canadians? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As our colleagues already said, there is only one party in this House which controls senators, and that's the Conservative Party. But if there was an appetite to bring down prices for Canadians and to ensure more access to food, then they would have supported the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. We hope that the Conservative leader will allow his members to vote independently because that will help us support Ukraine and their fight for freedom. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Well, the government is trying to turn attention away from what they're doing. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, Santa Claus received a list of Quebec's children who just want a good meal for Christmas as their Christmas gift. There have been 8 years of inflationary policies by this government, but the costly Bloc Liberal coalition just doesn't get it. They don't understand the hopes and dreams of Quebecers. It's costly to vote Bloc. The Bloc Québécois wants to radically increase the carbon tax, which makes everything more expensive. Will the Prime Minister finally put an end to his plans to radically increase the carbon tax on farmers and on families? The Honourable Government House Leader. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have great respect for my colleague across the way, Mr. Speaker, but I'm confused because he, as a Quebecer, knows full well that Quebec is not part of the federal carbon pricing system. That's why I don't understand why he continues to give Quebecers and Canadians that inaccurate information. But the Conservatives, at every possible opportunity, have voted against support to Canadians. So it's nice that now my colleague seems to want to support Canadians, but it's new.